I'd like to welcome everybody to the August Happy Hour. Tonight's topic is Testing Explained. And so why don't we start with intros and what is everybody drinking? Laura, I know that's Aaron's big question. He likes to know what everybody drinks. So Laura, what are you having to sip on tonight?
I've already had my sip on. I'm your typical middle-aged woman with my white wine.
Nothing wrong with that. Aaron, Jenny, what are we drinking tonight?
We are drinking a friend of ours makes wine, and so he made an apple raspberry that we're checking out tonight. We actually, when I went down to pick up the goats in Nebraska, I brought apple and apple cherry, which Chad and John enjoyed with us. So got to share some of that. And it's George.
Very cool.
Ask what we're drinking.
I know, George usually. One of these days, I'm going to require recipes in the chat. So come prepared next month. That looks so pretty. Victoria, what are you having tonight?
Absolutely nothing fun yet. Just water for now. We're running behind, and I'm still making dinner. So
I've skipped dinner. We haven't gotten there yet here. I'm pretty dull. I'm having water too. Becky, are you drinking anything fun?
Nope, just water here. I'm trying to hydrate.
Oh, and I see that Chris has joined us. Hey, Chris. Chris is in Pennsylvania, if you don't know her. She's a longtime breeder. So I was going to say, the rest of us know each other. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
On Chris's name, it says no audio. It just switched.
Oh, no. Oh, okay. I couldn't see that. Sorry. No problem. All right. All right. Any news from around the herd that people want to share? Fun, interesting. The only thing I'm going to point out is if you haven't checked out the Facebook group, there's a brand new set of triplets in Quebec that are absolutely gorgeous. The doe is sort of what's called a partial SCI pattern, and two of the kids are, and at least one of them's a doe. So I'm excited about that because those particular genetics are something I've been looking into and testing. So, woohoo! SCI GBA news. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So with that partial pattern, so I've had two kids born with that, and they both look fairly different now, and they don't have the full cape, but they didn't, the ones in the picture, because I saw those beautiful triplets, were very pale with just sort of this stripe down the back. And so that's what I had as kids, and they've changed over time and darkened, but they still don't have a big cape. Is that what you're finding? And is there a genetics for that? Because as you know, I have pretty much of a mix of genetics.
Well, that's what we're sort of test breeding to find out how the genetics work. It does seem with males. Laura froze, or am I frozen? Thumbs up if you guys can hear me. Ooh, did I freeze?
I can hear you.
Oh, okay, perfect. So preliminarily, it seems that males grow out of it, or at least partially grow out of it. But we're seeing females tend to keep it, or at least the growing out of it phase is a lot more minimal. And so that's sort of anecdotal. We're really starting to take notice and sort of, trying to get photo documentation from sort of start to throughout their lives to see how that holds, but also photos of parents, sort of what kind of patterns on the parents are throwing this partial. So I don't know if that answers your question as much as we don't really know. We're working on it.
No, it's super helpful. So I went out this afternoon. I took pictures of both the doe and the buck who had that at birth and what they look like now. So maybe that'll be helpful as we go.
Perfect. Because, yeah, I have photos from one of your bucklings last year at Godapalooza that was that partial color. So, and he was gorgeous. He was the one that had almost that silvering undertone in certain lights. It was just, he was phenomenal. I really, really liked him a lot.
And he got his dad's beautiful orange too. So, yeah, he's a sweetheart. Yeah, like, he has all the things. So that's why I was wondering. But he definitely silver on the sides.
So the one thing I will say about color and pattern genetics, it's not simple, like, like blue eyes and brown eyes. It's like one gene. And, we know if you put this, mix together, you're going to have brown eyes, you're going to have blue eyes, you're going to have hazel eyes. And coloration is a variety of genes that act upon each other. So I think, we shall sort of, as I said, we'll start and continue to document, and hopefully we'll start to figure out more of it. At the moment, is it necessary? Because, the overall genetics of the population are important. I just think it's fun. And I think people are attracted to colors. And so it's nice to know and be able to explain to them what you have and what you can get, and especially if it's something that pulls in more stewards. So, cool. Just as a reminder that we do have a YouTube channel, and happy hour recordings are on it. So if you want to go back and listen to anything, you can find it there. And I'll just put out a plea. If anybody wants to fiddle around with photo or video editing, you don't have to be a professional. Let me know. At some point, it'd be really cool to do not major editing, but maybe to put in end or beginning and end cards or something like that, or, cut out some of our miscellaneous conversation. But I'll just throw it out there in case. All right. So tonight's topic, it's chosen by you guys at last happy hour, is testing. So real quick, sort of who tests or who thinks they might want to test, how often, and why. Anybody want to share? Does anybody currently test? Victoria? Oh, I saw her unmute.
Sorry, I did. Are we talking about biosecurity testing or DNA?
Yeah, I think mainly, no. I think mainly we're talking about tonight sort of the testing for the big three, CAE, CL, and Yoni.
Yes. Okay. So we do test on our farm because we came from the dairy breeders. And, that's kind of ingrained in your head that they can't have any of those things and it's terrible and you have to call them. And then as I was talking with my vet recently, and specifically about this breed that is so rare and talking about preservation, the CL and CAE, he said, why do you even test for it? If the idea is to get more of the numbers, and it's not really necessarily a cullable disease per se, then why even test for it? And I sat there and I thought about it for a minute, because I was like, well, all I know is to test these animals for these diseases because that's what I was told, right? And then we still do, so I want everybody to know that, and my herd is clean because I can't get over that. But it was just, I started doing more research into it, and the CL, as long as it's contained, doesn't pass on to other ones. The CAE, if you know that they have it and you pull the babies don't get it. The Yonis, I haven't researched more into, and I know it has the placental cross to it, so it would be more of a risk. But it was just a topic I wanted to bring up to everybody, because if there is a giant herd that has CL or CAE, are we going to call them all and say, oh, well, we can't have that in our lines? Or do we preserve the breed and get around that? Does that make sense?
No, I think those are great topics, and hopefully I will touch on them. We'll touch on them as we go down, but I like that. I'm seeing I was missing people because I'm in the wrong view. We actually have a lot more people on the line than I realized. Let's see. I have George is here. Yay! And let's see who else is here. Or maybe that's it. 9. I have Sean. I don't know Sean. Off the top of my head, unless that's Sean Dyke out of Arkansas. And I think I saw Lisa's here.
Yep, I'm here.
Oh, perfect. All right. I know, Lisa, you said you test. How often and what do you test for? And why?
I test all animals over a year old, and the year threshold is because at least with CL and Yonis, my vet has said it's not going to reliably show up one way or the other in a younger animal. But we test for CL, CAE, and Yonis. I may add Q fever to that testing protocol. We've never really had a problem with Q fever out in my area, but I did recently hear UC Davis puts out like this whole newsletter of things they're finding in the area. They don't identify specific farms or anything, but they just kind of let you know if something's flowing through, like, there's been some alerts about some horse diseases in Southern California and stuff. But a couple months ago, they did say there was a very odd case of Q fever that showed up in, kind of like my county, and it could have just been an animal that was brought in, but we're keeping an eye on it to see if maybe we add that to our testing protocol. But I test because, you want to know, certainly as Victoria says, something like CL could be managed. There's tons of boar goat breeders that manage CL and don't think it's a problem, if you manage it properly. I don't know as much about CAE because my vet says we don't really have it in this area. But, if you have it and you know how to deal with it with any of these diseases, and that's just an important piece of information.
Thanks, Lisa. I was going to say we do test also. We test for the big 3. We start over a year. And I think, it started because we came from a dairy goat background, and it's basically expected. If you don't test, you're sort of like, off. Yeah. Nobody wants to be near your herd, I think. And that's so I'll leave that there, and then my other thoughts as we go along. All right. So first thing, sometimes if you haven't tested, you don't know or understand what we're talking about. And this is just meant as an overview. I encourage everybody, if you're interested in this topic, to, do your research. But the basic tests we're talking about are PCR, ELISA, and I don't know, do you say it's she? So PCR looks specifically for DNA and sections of DNA. So they're looking for the virus to see if the virus is present. ELISA and she are looking for the proteins from the antibodies. So has the virus been there in the past, or have you come in contact with it? Any questions? Oh, I have one more chat. Hold on.
My aunt. So is this for the big 3? And by the way, my herd has been tested for that. But I'm just seeing CL, but not CAE. And
Oh, therefore, we'll talk about which test is available, what type of testing is available for each disease. I happen to note the she because, to the best of my knowledge, that is a CL specific. So you won't find that for anything else. Please, somebody correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, we'll come down. And as I said, these will be available tomorrow. So I just did some overviews. So CAE, if you're not familiar with it, it's a progressive, debilitating, contagious virus, which is slow growing. So a goat can, as Victoria had mentioned, her vet was like, well, why test for it? Because a goat can live symptom-free for a really long time, and maybe even their entire life before there are symptoms if they show up. The thing to note, though, is that infected goats will, even if they're not displaying symptoms, will spread the virus. So that is something to know. And here are some of the symptoms. A lot of times they start to appear in most goats about 2 years of age. And the most common two forms of CAE present as arthritis. So their joints swell, and it can be really painful for a goat to walk and move around. And the exception to the 2-year mark is sort of like a meningitis, where the brain and the spine swell, and that's in kids starts about 6 months of age, and it can come on really quickly. So sometimes you'll see it sort of as a form of mastitis, especially in first-time doelings, and what they call hard bag. So essentially you have a hard udder with no milk, and rarely it will present as pneumonia or weight loss. So it's transmitted through contact with fluids, so milk, saliva, mucus, and kids can get it from nursing, if sort of respiratory fluids if you're coughing, or surfaces. But once it dries, the bacteria or the virus can't survive. So only wet surfaces. There's no known cure. There's no known treatment except for complementary care for any of the symptoms. Prevention, you can buy tested stock, test your own herd, basic biosecurity. And what's really big, especially in the milk industry, is kid separation. So a lot of times at birth, kids are immediately separated from their dams, and they are bottle fed, and they're only given heat-treated colostrum and milk, which kills off the virus. Let's see, what else? It's estimated that actually CAE is quite prevalent in the U.S., and there's some estimates that it can be as high as 70% of the goats, and it is not transmissible. It can be transmitted to humans. Going back to Victoria's comments about her vet suggesting not testing for CAE, I would think if you decide to keep, because of our current genetic situation, CAE goats, you definitely need to make sure you put in protocols, biosecurity to deal with that. I would definitely separate kids. And I also think the most important thing is to be ready to say when. And put the goat first and not your immediate human feelings. Because when symptoms come, it's just not fair. And I know that's hard, and that's especially hard for a lot of us that are dealing with animals that we're close to say enough is enough. So,
and Sarah, I would add that let's take this question, which is a good question, because we've got rare bloodlines and people are focused on certain things. If in the unfortunate situation, a very rare bloodline or something that we wanted to keep in our community herd came up with this disease or one of the others, knowing it was there and being able to properly manage the kids so that they didn't, they carried on the bloodline, but they didn't carry on the disease, that would be really important. That's where we would be using the knowledge of that particular disease to help save that bloodline.
Exactly. And I have some further down, I have an example with Yonis that I'll talk about. And that example would apply, I think could easily apply also to something like CAE. So I think the thing to remember is that when you're dealing with rare genetics, what's standard in the goat community may be a little different here, because we're trying to save genetics, and that's sort of our top priority. Not that we want any, we don't want to put goats to suffer or anything, but, we can go the extra mile if we need to.
I have a question. Is there any indication that CAE transmits placentally?
No, there is not. that I have seen, and I'm guessing it wouldn't be prevalent because otherwise, separating out kids wouldn't be so common, and you can't test kids till they're at least 6 months old. And
Right.
has anybody heard something different or?
No, so we actually did our own kind of micro study at my friend's sanctuary. She gets CAE positive goats, and if we pull the kids off of the mom, the babies never test positive for CAE. But if they're allowed to stay with the mom and nurse, they do end up testing positive for CAE. So I don't think that there is a placental cross like there is with the Yonis. I know it has that.
Well, thank you. So that's good to know. Yeah, as I said, I hadn't heard, but always confirmation is good. The next one is CL. It's a chronic bacterial infection that results in abscesses both externally and internally. External abscesses tend to be at the lymph nodes, very prevalent in the neck and abdomen. Internal abscesses, lungs, udders, liver, kidneys, and in severe cases, internal abscesses can interfere with organ function, so you may see wasting and other issues. So that's definitely something to look for in case. Transmission is when you come in contact with the pus, which carries, or respiratory secretions, which carry the bacteria. Rarely it is in milk. But the big thing is it can remain in soil for at least up to 8 months. There is no known cure, but it can be treated. You can lance and clean out abscesses or have them surgically removed. And you want to remember to lance on a hard surface that can be sanitized. And you want to keep goats quarantined until an abscess heals. Prevention. There is a vaccination for CL. Again, you can purchase from tested or CL-free herds, strict biosecurity, and if you need to, you can also do kid separation to make sure CL does not pass along. Overall prevalence in the U.S. is uncommon, 8%, and CL can transmit to humans. So make sure you have biosecurity for yourself, gloves, stuff like that. You don't want to get sick. And I have a note here because I have seen this. When you are doing vaccinations or any sort of injection, please make note as to in your journal where you put it, because some injections can result in a knot. And I've seen people panic thinking, oh my God, we have CL. And all it was a knot from a vaccination. So it's just something easy to do. I have never done this, but a big name over in the meat goat industry, she swears by formalin, that if you take abscesses and clean them or drain them, you can clean them with formalin to ensure they heal. I don't know if anybody has tried that or have experience. Has anybody dealt with CL or seen CL in person?
We have over at the sanctuary the injection of formalin. They say to keep it closed and inject it straight into her, and it becomes a scab and falls off. And then there's no contamination of the pus anywhere, and it can't pass on. Otherwise, when you drain it, you run the risk of it being in the soil, and you have to clean everything, and it's just awful. And so there is things, Vicron, when we come home from there, when we're helping out there, we wear different shoes at our farm, and we spray everything down with Vicron, but it's just gross, to be honest.
That is really interesting, Victoria. As I said, I've never seen it myself in person, so I think sometimes some of these things sound so scary. So it's nice to hear from somebody that actually has seen it and can be like, it's not that bad. You deal with it this way. Does anybody else have questions, thoughts, comments?
I do have one comment from my vet, is that it is transmissible through flies up to 2 miles away. So that to me is kind of scary because, there might be people who don't care, like commercial herds, of sheep grazing around that don't really care about stuff like this. So just something to kind of keep an eye out for. And also, at least in our area, it's said to live in the soil for years, not just 8 months. So just another thing to think about. I'm curious what human disease, I had not heard that it was transmissible to humans before, so I was curious about what kind of human disease does it cause? Oops, did I lose you?
Sorry, I was muted. If I understand, it basically manifests in the lymph nodes and they have to be removed, but it is rare. I think it's more along the lines of, just something to be aware of. It's not like everybody that works with CL is going to catch something. So, area. All right. Okay. CL. Then, I guess the other thing I was going to be saying about.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I was just going to say, again, looking at the boar goat world, where they, for whatever reason, don't feel that this is too big of a deal. I've known goats that lived until ripe old, 15, 16 years old, CL's positive, only ever had one bump in their life, and then lived without another one, their whole life. Obviously, the owner watched them closely because they don't want any transmission, but it's not necessarily a death sentence for a good animal if the owner is willing to kind of keep a close eye on them. And the other thing that I'd say is because, it's so prevalent, like in the boar goat world or whatever, when I buy a goat, a boar goat, I really look and check on the tests that somebody has done and then retest. Maybe that's just an indication of that market or whatever, but you can't always trust what you're told.
Definitely true. And I'll reiterate this sort of at the end, is that a lot of this has to do with what your market is. As I said, I know Lisa comes more from a meat background, and I know, CL, as long as you're managing it, doesn't really seem to be an issue there. Dairy, it's like never, so, you have to take into consideration, what your market is and who you're wanting to sell to, and with your herd goals, is CL a big deal? So, George, did you want to talk about CL at all?
I think you've covered everything quite well. My experience was there are two different types of tests. Use Washington. Don't use Purdue. And that's actually coming from Purdue. We had false positives pop there even after a second round, and so we got on a conference call with our vet and the pathologist at Purdue, and Purdue said, we don't trust that test. So they sent the samples at their expense, which was nice, to Washington, and everything was tested clear. So there's something about the ELISA test that produces too many false positives for most folks, apparently. So that was just our experience.
Good to know. Thank you, George, so much. All right. Next is the one that I think most people worry about, and that's Yoni's. Yoni's is a contagious bacterial infection that it's contracted by kids, but the symptoms a lot of times don't appear until a goat is about 3 years old. Again, the entire time infecting your herd. Its basic symptoms are rapid weight loss and chronic diarrhea. And transmission is through ingestion of manure, i.e. usually dust, because, our goats don't necessarily, hopefully, are not eating others' manure, and milk. And it's horrible because the bacterium is very resistant. It's resistant to heat, cold, and drying. There's no cure and no treatment. The best resource is the Yoni's Center at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And the exact quote from all of their information is, do not introduce it. Purchase tested stock, repeat testing on quarantine animals. You want basic biosecurity. If you're concerned or if you have Yoni's that's tested, you can do kid separation. And you do want to, definitely quarantine and eventually probably call infected adults, simply for humane reasons after we've saved whatever genetics, and we'll talk about that. So prevalence, there's not enough testing and reporting, so they're not really sure. And there's controversy as to whether it can be transmitted to humans, but if it is, it's extremely minor. And it presents sort of like a set of Crohn's disease, from what, it does, lives in the soil for years. Yeah. I will say that we actually, I think it was about 3 years ago, an entire herd in Minnesota was called for Yoni's. And it was both San Clemente's and Arapawas. So extremely heartbreaking to see that happen. And the thing you should know is that, they really call Yoni's a herd problem because one goat can start with it, and it's not, if you don't act and do proper management, it's not a question of if it becomes a herd problem, it's when it becomes a herd problem. Something to note, though, and keep an eye for is that there's no vaccine in the U.S., but there are several countries, especially in Europe, that are using a vaccine. So hopefully at some point that will make it here to the U.S. But as we know, cattle is king, and we're just raising goats. And so when it gets here, we don't know. Let's see. And what I was going to, do I have it? No. Okay. Does anybody else have any questions or thought on Yoni's? Lisa?
Yeah, it does cross the placental barrier about 10% of the time. So that makes it particularly scary because you may not know a goat has it, and then the baby has it, and then, it propagates itself. This is something that cattle can get too. And my understanding is that the estimate is about 85% of the commercial dairy herd has it. And that scares the dog out of me for a lot of reasons. But if somebody, you got a farm and you just want a nice little family milk cow, and you go to the dairy and get a day-old calf and bring it home and raise it, that could bring Yoni's onto your farm. There is a lot of controversy. I've read some different articles. There's some controversy and scientific discussion about how it may present itself in humans. And with the rapid rise of irritable bowel syndrome and Crohn's and all these, Crohn's disease and stuff in humans, there are some scientists making a case that it might be transmitted through commercial milk, because it does survive pasteurization about 15% of the time. So this is not one that you want at all, and especially if you're doing anything with milk, whether it's San Clemente's or not. you don't want this, because if it does come down, as some of the scientists are saying, of course they're getting shot down by other scientists, but there's a group of scientists saying, hey, we are finding a related, genetically related virus in humans that's causing Crohn's and irritable bowel and all these problems people are starting to have, and it seems to be directly related to the rise of Yonis in the cow herds. You don't want to be selling like raw milk or even pasteurized milk and have people even have like a hint that you could be creating a problem for them, if you know what I'm saying. So anyway, something to really watch out for. This is the big one in my mind.
I completely agree, Lisa. And yeah, so it's definitely something you want to test for. And yeah, I'll come back to more about that.
And it can survive pasteurization. That's the thing. It can survive pasteurization in milk.
Okay. I'll make my miscellaneous notes look nicer before I post this. And going along that line, the last one I just wanted to point out, and for the vast majority of us, it is not an issue, is TB. And I don't really think I need to explain to anybody what TB is. I'm sure we all know. I guess, do they still do TB vaccinations? I had one as a kid. And it's respiratory. It can be transmitted through raw milk and respiratory secretions. There's no cure. And the big thing is that TB is a USDA required, or report required. And so basically, if you test positive for TB, there is, we don't need to talk about treatment, because they're going to require you to put your goat down. Most of us, or a lot of the country, is considered TB free. So here in Virginia, for example, we're declared TB free, so we don't have to worry about it. I do know there's parts of the country, particularly if you're in areas with large stock like buffalo. I think I can't remember percentage off the top of my head, but it's high. Like 90% of all wild buffalo populations in the U.S. are thought to carry TB. So a lot of the upper Midwest is not considered TB, and so you do need to test for it, especially if you're milking, because the last thing you want to do is pass TB. As a sort of a interesting side story, I do ancestry. I'm really big into genealogy, and I came across the draft card for my great uncle. My grandfather and his brothers all grew up on a second-generation dairy farm in upstate New York, and my uncle was turned down for World War II because he technically had TB, because they milked, and back in that time, they weren't as stringent about biosecurity, and so essentially, I'm assuming if his brothers who were younger had been tested, and my grandfather, who is also, because he, actually my grandfather did have TB, he lost a kidney. I think that's what my mom said. He only has one functioning kidney. So yeah, TB is definitely not something you want in a milking herd. And again, something that everybody needs to test for all the time. It's just something to keep in mind. And like Lisa mentioned, there are a lot of other diseases that can be tested for, but they're much less prevalent in the U.S. And usually, a lot of times, you only test when they're displaying symptoms, or if you know your area has an issue, like Q fever. So if you're interested in learning more, I really recommend, as George commented, Waddell. And this gives, the link takes you directly to their testing page for goats and everything they test for. I mean, there's going to be stuff there that most likely you're like, what the heck is this? I've never heard of it. And I guess that's probably, I'll tell you, it's probably good you've never heard of it, but it's there and you can learn more and just, expand your knowledge. All right.
I have a question about TB because supposedly we're TB free in California, supposedly. But when I had a dairy cow, she had to get a TB shot before a certain age, and then she had like a TB passport saying she has a shot, so she can't have TB. I didn't quite understand it all, but it's state law. This is for dairy cows. So for some reason, they don't do it for beef cows, but for dairy. And I'm just wondering, are you saying that we should do the same thing with the goats? Is there like a TB shot for goats? Or
they can be tested. It's a skin test and it can only be done by a vet. And the vet comes out, and it's sort of like, have you guys ever been tested for TB? They sort of prick your skin, and then, I can't remember, is it 48 or 72 hours? You have to come back and see if there's like a rise or a rash or anything like that. And that's essentially what they do for goats. And I pointed TB out because, like, for example, we do raw milk herd shares. So we do test for TB because we want to make sure that we can tell our customers that they're, that we are TB free, that's not something they're going to have to worry about in the milk they're getting from us. I don't think you necessarily need to worry about it if you're a meat goat or a conservation breeder, because one, most of us are TB free from TB free states, and we're just not seeing it. So I really think it's probably something you want to talk to your vet about and decide, is it something that needs to, you need to consider.
Okay. So you don't know of a TB vaccine. And this was a while ago, so I could be misinterpreting the test that they conduct on them with the shot. I just remember the heifer that I had born here got a shot. It had to be before she was a year old. She got a special tag, and it got listed in a government database, and she was then, given the all clear, this cow does not have TB, even though we're a TB-free state, supposedly. I just didn't know if there was something that standard with the goats, or we're on our own.
It's my understanding that there is technically they've been testing a vaccine that's showing really great efficacy, but I don't believe it's widely available on the market, and it probably needs to, again, be from a vet.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and a lot of these things are much more prevalent in Europe, especially because, goat usage and goat dairies are much more prevalent there than they are here. We're sort of playing catch up. But yeah, I'm not, and I also think because the vast majority of the country is considered TB free, it just doesn't seem to be a priority.
Okay.
Right, on their mind, not necessarily on ours, but
they don't seem to, with cows, like if you move them across state lines, it's a huge deal, right? And they don't seem to ask about it as much with goats.
Yeah, we've always found with vet certificates, a lot of the times it really is assumptions. Oh, they're TB free. You're coming from such a state, and so you don't need to test. Now, I do know if I were to bring legally goats in from, I think it's Wisconsin, Minnesota, the Dakotas into Virginia, I believe those happen to be states, Wyoming, where they happen to have larger populations of wild ruminants. You're required to test those, and it's not just the goat. It has to be, I believe, the entire herd has to be tested to prove that it comes from a free herd. I wouldn't quote me on that because I haven't recently shipped in from any of those states. But last I looked, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
Okay, testing options. So real quick to give everybody an idea, CAE is a blood test. They require a minimum of 6 months, and it's an ELISA, and it averages about $10. CL can be done either through a blood or you can directly test the pus. Again, they recommend over 6 months of age as for the blood, and that's tested through either the SCI or you can do a bacteria culture. And the quickest way and the best way is to, test the pus, not the blood, to determine if your goat has CL. The interesting thing about CL is that from everything I read, like if you have a CL-free herd and you think something is CL, test. If you have CL in your herd, just assume it's going to be CL is what a lot of vets are saying. And don't waste your time testing. Just be like, yeah, that's going to be CL because I know, this goat and this goat have it. So it's in our herd and it passes. Your call, but that's sort of, what I'm seeing across the board. Yonis. You can test feces or blood. They recommend over 18 months. It can be done through a PCR, which is $58. ELISA, about 10, or you can run a culture, 45. And as I said, TB here is an intradermal, need to be 12 months or older, and you need to actually have a vet come out to your farm to run that. The other thing to look for is some labs run biosecurity panels, which run the big 3 all together. And so it can be a time saver because you only have to send one sample. A little bit of savings money-wise, but not much. And something to remember about testing is that testing, a single test only gives you information for that point in time. And it's not necessarily a reliable indicator of overall herd health. You need a routine, that goes, as I think I saw where George said in the comments, or was it Lisa who said in the comments, that their vet says you need like 5 years of clean tests to be called a clean herd. And so, I can't remember who off the top of my head. Anyway, so yeah.
Yeah, that was my vet.
Okay. I was just reading recently somewhere, somebody said they found, I can't remember which of the big 3 they found in their herd, but they found one of the big 3, and they said, well, we bought tested animals. Well, yes, the animals were tested, but they were only tested once, like 3 years ago. And so obviously something had popped up in the meantime. You can test both groups of animals or individuals, which is a great, it can be a real cost saver too, as George commented. Let's see what else.
Are you talking about testing groups with the feces test?
Yes, if you're using a feces test, you can sort of collect in a high traffic area, and so you sort of get a idea of the overall, group.
So I had asked my vet about that because obviously with as many goats as I have, this gets very, very expensive. And she was not a big fan of that because she says, well, for 2 reasons. One, if you get a positive, it only says that it's in your environment. It doesn't necessarily say that your goats have it, right? That's one aspect. But on the other side, she said, your goat, and this applies, I think the feces test is only for Yonis. I don't know if it would be for TB or CAE or not,
yeah.
But you can do the feces test. A goat can have Yonis for years and pass it on to its babies placentally or through milk or whatever, and never shed it in their feces. Yeah. So you're almost getting a false sense of security. And so her recommendation was each individual and start with the blood test. And then if you had any concerns, like, okay, what's happening with this animal that isn't consistent with a negative result, then go to the feces test for that animal alone. That was her recommendation.
And let me clarify with the grouping. so what we do is we take samples from each individual. These are fecal samples, and they're bagged and tagged individually. The lab then takes 5 of them, puts them together, and tests the batch of 5, so they're running one test. So you're only paying for one test. If that test shows a positive, then they break it out and test each individual.
Yeah, and just her comment on that, because I was going to go that route. It was a lot less money, but she was just saying that a goat cannot shed in their feces and still have yonis for many, many years.
Well, that's true, but that's
I'm putting it out there as just information. I mean, everybody has to have their own kind of protocol. It scares me. It almost feels like you have to do both. Maybe, I don't know.
Well, yeah, well, do more than less. But the big takeaway after, and we had a CL scare, as some of you know, and after months of testing and working with the pathologists and everybody, everything came back okay. But talking with several pathologists, my takeaway was that you have to assume every herd is infected. And what you're testing for is to try to catch it before it goes clinical.
Okay.
And so, my and a number that Sarah put up there earlier of 70% of herds, and I think that was for CL or Yonis.
CAE, I think.
Yeah, so 70% of herds are considered infected, and that's kind of the same numbers that I was getting from pathologists at Purdue. Was that there is no such thing as a clean herd. There's just a herd that hasn't popped yet, because these things are so prevalent.
Wow.
And that really made me think about this a little differently. Not in the sense that, well, I'm not going to test and it's not worth it. It's that I'm really being vigilant to make sure I catch things before they go clinical, and that's the best I can do. And it really made me think about when I'm buying, what am I looking for from my sellers? And that's where my comments, if you've been reading my comments, I'm more concerned about transparency of records than a simple one-word label.
I think that's just a good indicator that we all should be testing, because no matter how careful you are or how careful you are with your purchases or whatever, in some cases it could be something like CL where your neighbor 2 miles away, has it, and then suddenly you get it, right? It's better to know and figure out what you have to deal with and manage it before it gets to all your animals.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've got herds around me, small, but I've got goats around me, and I know that their owners won't test. So
yeah, it's scary.
Nothing I can do about that.
Nope, there's nothing you can do. Yeah, and especially, I mean, if you take animals out on grazing projects, you got to be very careful, because you could be next to a strange group of animals. You could be on land that 2 years before had to be cleared of goats because of some crazy disease they all got. I mean, it's just good to know. I think it's just good to know.
And the question came up, is this annual, biannual? We do annual, and we do, rather than a sampling, we do every individual. But we're under 50 head, so we're not running 400 head or so. So we can. It's expensive, but we can test every animal at this point. That may change in the future, but we're testing every animal annually. Budget is going to be a constraint for some folks. It's expensive to do all 3 on every animal every year. You do what you can do. I think it's because most of these are herd diseases. And that's why some people do a sampling rather than every individual animal, So your vet may recommend just do a sampling. Just do 10% of your herd if you have a large herd. That can help cut costs.
All really great points. What was I going to say? I think one of the big things, as George commented about before, is there's both false positives and false negatives that can occur for a variety of reasons, such things as how the sample was collected and stored, the timing of the collection, was the goat old enough, are they under some sort of stress from whether it be kitting or vaccination or parasite load, and also too, depending on what you're testing for, is the infection too recent? Have the, is the antibody, I put county, that's not right. Is the antibody count too low for detection? It hasn't, your the immune system hasn't gone into full blown yet. And just some ideas for handling if you do get, and positive is, you can quarantine and repeat in a test in 4 to 8 weeks. Do you do the same test? Do you do a different type of test? And of course, you could discuss a plan of action with your vet is always the best, so that you know what to do. The last thing anybody else wants to do is to make a poor decision on, how to deal with an animal. Doing, sort of reading through and researching for stuff, I came across a lot of articles that are just like, well, it tested positive, call it. Next day it needs to be, being sent to slaughter. And I'm like, yeah, that's not how I personally deal with things. I'd like to, get information and know what I'm dealing with.
Early on, you had mentioned recommending to use the Washington, I assume, lab for the CL test. Do you know what kind of test they do?
Yes. Let me pull it up. It is, so for CL, they do the SHI.
The SHI, okay.
SHI. Purdue does the ELISA.
All right. Yeah, Davis does the ELISA too. So that's why I was kind of curious. I might send my CL testing to Washington to just kind of see what the difference might be.
Yeah. Especially if you get a false positive on the ELISA.
Yeah. Washington doesn't even do the ELISA. They only do, either the PCR or the SHI. So, let me go back here. Run lab, single test. I discussed false positives. So in case you haven't seen test reports in the past, I threw 2 up. I blacked out who the owner was. And these particular ones we've been reviewing recently because they are extremely rare genetic SCIs, and they're a high percentage of a particular rare bloodline. The does have never been bred. They're, I believe the 2 in question are 7 and 10 years old, and a breeder was going to acquire them, and they popped. And it will be easier to look out when you tomorrow can download the whole thing. But what you'll see here, they were tested for everything. For CL, everything came back negative except for a single positive right here for Yoni. And this is a 10-year-old doe, kept with 5 other goats, 2 sheep, and a cow. And nobody else came up positive. And this was an ELISA test, so a blood test. And they waited and they reran the PCR on this particular goat, and it came up negative. So, exactly. So any form of testing, whether you get especially positives, it is long term. Figuring out, retesting, and stuff like that. And this particular goat, we talked to the genetics lab that we're working with for the genetics committee, and they said after looking at the test that they believe that when all is said and done, we're going to run another test that she's probably negative for Yoni's, since she's been here for 10 years. There's been all these other animals with her day in and day out. Nobody, the herd. They looked at the whole herd, but we're hoping it comes back negative, and we are hedging our bets, and we're hoping to embryo flush her in November, using biosecurity rules so that we can get embryos, and they won't be re-implanted into her. They'll go into donor goats that are not SCIs. So we're doing what we need to save the genetics and hedging our bets so that everybody's safe, the way we need to be. But
that sounds like a really good protocol. And that's the fact that she's 10 and she's not shedding does make me question whether that's a false positive. But still, I think that's the right protocol, just so that there's no chance that she would pass that on to her babies. And I would hope also that she maybe get like her own special home, almost a permanent quarantine, at least until you got a couple other negative, or you could do some blood tests again and try to get a negative on her, but just to try to get that negative, because this is, it's insidious.
It is, and again, I don't want to ID people because that's not fair. But I will say, just so everybody knows, she's in a very good home, under constant vet care protocols. This is one freaking pampered goat in herd. So yeah, and the particular home in general has a lot of protocols. They have agritourism, so these goats are in contact with people. So yeah, really, really great place for them. But yet, as I said, in the bloodline, she is the highest percentage. I believe she's like 70%, and she's the only 70% doe, and she's the only one that comes out. So you can see why we're sort of hedging our bets on another round of testing, flushing her for embryos, putting them into donors that are not SCIs, whose genetics we don't, that sounds horrible that you might be sacrificing a goat. But, we're doing what we need to make sure our genetics are maintained. And it's a protocol we've been working heavily on so that nobody has to worry about their current herds of SCIs. So,
Sarah, you allude to a really important point that I think as breeders we need to deal with, which is the stigma. This whole testing thing and having a clean herd and that label that we strive after, it really starts to feel like STDs, right? That if we have a Yoni's pop on our farm, we don't want anybody to know this. We're going to hide this. We're going to cover it up. This is just the reality of having livestock, and especially, as breeders of these kind of animals, we got to get rid of the stigma, and we're all going to face it at some point. It sounds like, just when we look at the numbers of prevalence, the percentage of prevalence in the animals, it just feels like. And this is, I can say this because we had that scare. And I was like, holy cow, am I looking at the rest of my career raising livestock with an unclean herd? What am I going to do? So,
I think that's an important point. Just openness and being able to talk about things, and then sharing ideas on how to manage them and that kind of stuff. I also don't want to go the boar goat route where they're just like, it doesn't matter. Everybody has Yonis, right? We just butcher the animals at 4 years old, you know. It's like, you don't want that either, right? So I don't know, but I think you're right. I mean, just being able to it's almost being like collaborative with the community herd that we are all entrusted to, and making sure that everybody has the right tools and knowledge to manage when these issues pop up, and then the support of the community so that you can go forward. So this doe who has such a rare bloodline isn't stigmatized. We know that the right things are being done, and heaven help us if she has 10 kids from her flushing, they're all good, clean animals that, you know, should go out in the community herd and be used.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great point, Lisa. Oh, sorry, somebody else. I wasn't initially part of, going back to this doe, I wasn't part of the group that was dealing with this. And after she popped for Yoni's, I was brought in, and basically everybody else was like, well, it's over. And so I was like, no, it's not, you know, we're going to figure out the Hail Mary pass here. And, you know, and it just I continued to talk to people. I continued to talk to experts, and, you know, and show the tests, and, you know, and you hit the right one with the right knowledge. That's like, yeah, we have a USDA certified lab. Send us that information. I don't think it's an issue. You know, flushing isn't, you know, the flushing never would have occurred to me to even begin with. It was the first start because, I mean, not to throw Dr. Spangenberg under the bus, but Dr. Spangenberg was like, put her down now, don't breed her, you know. I mean, he was not very hopeful at all for finding a solution. And I understand his background, you know, he's come across a lot of goats, but I'm like, no, I've refused to give up on this goat, even if I'm the one who has to, I think we're going to probably sacrifice my parents' non-livestock farm. They do trees, and, you know, I'll probably get the donors, and I'll probably kid there. So, you know, worst comes to worst, it's a farm that I don't have to worry about spreading anything. And, there will never be livestock on it. My sister still has another 50 years to live. And as she says, every time she sees a goat, oh, gross, it's a goat. So I can be guaranteed that in general, she's never getting a herd of anything, you know, similar to a goat. But yeah, it is, I think, education.
Embryos will be clean. I mean, if you use clean host does, the embryos are clean. There's no placental transmission at that point. And the placental transmission is only like 10%, but you're going to flush far earlier than the placenta developing. So, you know, if we educate everybody right, you know, and say, here's the science of it, all of those babies will be totally clean as much as anyone else's babies.
Exactly. But it's getting, as George and you both pointed out, it's getting people over the stigma. You know, I think people are just like, oh, you can't do that. You know, I think Victoria would be the first to raise her hand in a similar situation. It's getting over horns. I mean, we're working right now in the youth, like, well, there's horns. You can't have SCIs, you know, they have horns. Well, you know, we talked about last month, pigs are more dangerous, and nobody's, you know, throwing pigs out under the bus at 4-H. And you're right, we can find solutions to make sure minimal risk, maximum genetics, and continue to educate and present the science as we go, which is so important.
And I think as we talk about this and hopefully are open and transparent about this, I mean, let's take the perspective of we're armed with the knowledge and we're armed with the science. And so that's why these babies, hopefully there'll be lots of babies from this flushing, these babies are safer than most of the Nigerians that you would buy, you know, out in the world.
That is a really good point, Lisa. I never would have thought of, you know, that sort of a tagline or, you know, consideration, but you're right. They're essentially sort of lab grown. So,
Well, and you're doing the testing, you're doing the scientific thing. They're going to be very healthy babies. And I think, if we as a community take the approach of we're going to test, we're going to understand, we're going to properly treat, and properly manage. And in cases where it's proper to put an animal down, properly put an animal down or whatever. But, we're the community that knows how to manage and has a vision of how our community of goats are going to be freer of all of this because of our testing and our knowledge and our management. That's a good thing.
Definitely. And I like that this community a lot of times is breaking the mold, working to get, our goats out there and figuring out how is the best way to do it, no matter what the situation. So very exciting. Yay! So I put some basic resources. The first one is a link to a Goat Journal article that's just a basic intro to testing for the big three. The second one is the Yoni Information Center at the University of Wisconsin. They have some really great, easy to understand resources. They also have some more technical resources that are great for vets. So, check it out yourself if you want if you think your vet needs more education and they're receptive, you can print some of the booklets and stuff out for them. Where to test. So we talked about Waddell, we talked about UC Davis, a lot of state veterinarian office labs you can use, a lot of state vet schools, Michigan State, I know, Waddell, UC Davis. George mentioned Purdue, but it's recommending not. Any other places people are testing?
I will say to make sure that you are checking any state labs, because I know in Tennessee, at least for cattle, the state actually covers the cost of a bunch of different labs. So I haven't checked on for goats yet, but I would assume it's for goats as well. But your state may cover the cost of some labs. So you want to look into that because that can save people a whole bunch of money.
And also shop around, because we actually use the North Carolina State Lab because they run better tests and they're cheaper than Virginia. And my goat mentor, her husband works for the Virginia State. He's the head of the Virginia State Veterinary Labs, and he was like, "Go to North Carolina." I was like, "Okay, let me check him out." So, yeah. But the other thing to remember when you're looking for labs is that not all laboratories are created equal. So you definitely want to, as you can ask your vet, ask other, goat owners who they're using. You want to look for a place that's accredited and has quality control and review processes. They're either going to be accredited with the American Association of Veterinary Laboratory Diagnosticians or USDA FDA certified.
This is very important because I was trying to save a few pennies and I went to a lab that was recommended by me, and when I gave my vet the results, she chewed me out and said, "You can't go to this lab, they don't have the accreditation." And she actually tried to help the lab prove their accreditation. She was having UC Davis call them to see, their protocols or whatever, so that I could trust their test results, and they wouldn't even talk to the UC Davis folks. So I ended up having to redo all of my testing at UC Davis.
Oh.
Yeah. So very important. Yeah, it was an expensive lesson.
I will say, especially for Yonis, if you check out University of Wisconsin's website, they have a whole section on diagnosing Yonis and what other labs should be, because they're sort of considered at the moment sort of the height of research in Yonis here in the U.S. So So they even have recommendations for how other labs should be working and what sort of testing they should be doing and how they should be making their diagnosis. So it's a really interesting read. If you don't have a science background, it can be one of those you may need to read a few times, but I think most people can get through it, even if it's slow. And so before I move on, is there any other comments or questions about testing for the big three experiences? So the next thing I just wanted to talk to, and this is more sort of for fun, is DNA testing for markers. And that you can use DNA testing to reveal the presence of or the not presence of different types of genes for different traits, disease susceptibility. And this is really prevalent in cattle because, of course, there's big money there, but it's starting to filter into goats. UC Davis does have some testing for markers for goats, not a lot, but the really cool thing is the Boer Goat Association, so i.e. the sort of the big industry meat goat standard here in the U.S. is working currently with a lab to start developing marker tests for different things. So it's something to keep an eye on and see what comes up and what becomes available. It would be really great if we're able to sort of test ahead via DNA that some particular goats are susceptible to a certain type of disease, or or the likelihood is they'll catch it or they won't catch it, or they're hardy against something. So I think there's some really interesting science coming. We just have to wait for it to catch up with us. So to wrap up, I encourage everyone to implement a testing routine at the least. Please develop protocols for prevention, minimization, how to detect and deal, especially end-of-life decisions. If somebody really gets bad, you don't want to have to deal with that. You don't want to have to come up with what you're going to do at the time. It's best to know, how you're going to handle it beforehand. Definitely discuss with your vet, or if you don't have a really good goat vet, a small ruminant extension specialist, to help you develop a plan that best fits your herd's goals. And excuse me, remember, there's no single solution for disease management. What I might do here might not work for Lisa or George or Victoria. We have different goals with our herds, and what we need to find out, what information we need in relevance to our herds are, maybe different. And as a side note, does anybody have any favorite resources that I should include? I will put the link in for, I think it's January's happy hour, where we actually talked about how to make testing pay for itself and marketing and sales and stuff like that. And I will include some videos on how to draw blood. If you can learn to draw your own blood, it is a huge money saver. And it's really not that hard, especially if you have good handling equipment to restrain a goat, so you're not, straddling somebody trying to draw blood. Anybody have any favorite vet supplies they like to use? We're big Jeffers. We buy from Jeffers in bulk. I like that. Anybody else?
I'll get you the name of the place that I got my latest blood draw equipment. I got the specialized needles and the vacuum tubes at a really great price, but I just can't remember the name of it right now, but I'll send it to you.
All right, perfect. Anyone else? Well, that is all I had on testing. If there's no others, then next topic for next month, what do we want to discuss? We've talked about maybe talking about the finances of keeping SCIs or handling equipment. What are you guys thinking? No suggestions? I guess I'll come up with something on my...
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah?
Since we're coming up on kind of a traditional breeding, at least in our area, it might actually be a good idea to do, especially for newer people like us, tips for breeding. You know, whether it's how to choose which doe to breed in, or you know, I think that's a lot of what somebody who's new at least struggles.
You know,
that's a great idea.
This falls in line with what we had discussed at one of the board meetings of a breeding selection guide, right? Where we don't want to get so strict with the breed standard that we exclude a wide swath of our goats and hurt our genetic diversity, but we are at a point where we can start selecting for certain traits that would help the goats be healthier and happier, you know, and more physically fit going forward, and eventually, we're talking years, right, get to a breed standard. So, I mean, I'd be up for that because I've had it in the back of my mind that we should put together a breed selection guide for folks that maybe don't have as much experience with other livestock types and the form to function and why you want legs to, you know, look a certain way because of how they would move and jump on the island and stuff like that. So that, I think that would be a good discussion.
Yeah, because we're new, and you know, right now we have one buck, so we don't have a whole lot of choice. And then I don't think we're going to be breeding this year just because of the size of our 18-month-old.
Yeah, even our 18-month-olds are very small, so they're very narrow hips and so we're going to take another break from breeding.
I think that's a great idea. Lisa sent me a great example of a selection guide, and I forwarded it to a volunteer. So I will contact them and see if I doubt they'll have anything ready per se to present as much as just the preliminary outline, and then, you know, we can talk about it and see what else needs to go into it. What do you think, Lisa?
I think that'd be great if you could put that volunteer in touch with me. I've been taking notes because we are walking a line where we don't want to exclude. We have a wide variety on our goats, everything from size to certain shapes, colors, and all this kind of stuff. We don't want to exclude certain things, but we are like hawks. What's true cow hawks? And that would be bad in any animal, but what's a sickle hawk? And why might a sickle hawk be good, right? A sickle hawk allows an animal to jump better. Animals, you know, our goats in the wild on the island would need to jump and run across, you know, rock formations and stuff. So, you know, things like that, I'd love to discuss with this person, you know, that would help put the breed selection guide in place so that we could help people understand that, you know, and things like, you know, mouth and teeth structure, you know, when is a bite so bad that you might not want to breed an animal. Just things like that. No, we cannot work out the jumping trait. I see someone put that in the comments. I have dealt with that. I had to butcher a very pretty San Clemente Island buck because he jumped every fence I had and bred half of my boar goats. So, yeah.
How'd that crossbreed work?
You know, I'm raising them right now. They're going to be very small, but they seem to have a lot of true San Clemente traits. I mean, this buck, he was 1.5 years old, full buck. I mean, breeding everything. That's why he had to go to freezer camp. But we're eating him right now, and there's no buck taint. And he was beautiful. It's the best goat meat we've ever had, and tender. And I've sold some of it to my customers so that they can give me feedback, and all the feedback I'm getting is great. So even though our goats are a lot smaller, about half the size of boar goats, the meat is truly superior. So
yeah, we were thinking of San Clemente with fainters.
Oh, okay, for the
Has anybody tried that?
The size, yep.
We haven't. We're just doing straight San Clemente's, and we've always believed the meat's superior, but at some point we'll have to do some blind taste tests to, put us up against others. And at some point I want to get us submitted to this, the Arc of Taste, but I just haven't had time for that. I think San Clemente meat and milk, should be there.
Oh, that's a really, really good idea. That's a really good idea.
So if somebody wants to take on that, I will always take on volunteers.
I was looking
Actually,
at them. That would be interesting. Yeah.
It is a good marketing tool because the Navajo Churro sheep that we raise are on the Slow Food Arc of Taste, and it really helps people develop a curiosity to try it and then see, how different it is. And honestly, when you raise meat goats, there's a lot of things that you can do in management and feeding that affect the taste, right? So just saying, goat, just general goat that someone might have picked up at an auction or some old billy that they butchered or whatever versus our San Clemente, that's really not a fair comparison. But, that being said, even a well-raised goat, managed properly, away from the bucks, so it doesn't get tanked or whatever, there still is a distinct fine quality to our San Clementes and a tenderness at an age where some of the other meat goats might not have that much tenderness that I think is superior.
That is really good to know, Lisa. I'm looking, at some point we'll hopefully start to get more people. Back to the Arc of Taste, I think the next hurdle we need to jump, we're getting our numbers, we have plans for the saving genetics. I think the next hurdle is the economic hurdle, and how do we market these goats, and how do we get to see people, for people to see them as usable livestock aside from just, numbers and conservation. So.
Agree.
All right. So next month we will talk about tips for breeding and selecting breeders versus genetic conservation. Well, if you guys don't have anything else, thank you so much for being here tonight and for all of your input. I really appreciate it. I love these happy hours. They make me happy. I enjoy seeing you guys every month. I was telling somebody today, I'm like, there's such a fun group of people. I don't know. As my aunt would say, it's now a party because George is here. No, type of thing.
I'd like to figure out a way to get more new breeders involved. Some of the new breeders aren't on Facebook, so I got to put my mind to how we might bring them in, because I know several people that I've sold goats to that just don't do Facebook or whatever, but I think they would benefit from discussions like this. I don't know if anyone has a comment on how we could do that.
Perhaps a call list, personal invite, personal touch. Okay. I know with Facebook, man, if I'm not watching that thing every day, things fly by in the feeds and I miss a lot of stuff.
Yeah, I never get notifications for stuff like this. I just knew I had put this one on the calendar because I knew it was happening, but it never seems to pop to the top of my list.
But a phone tree with maybe reaching out with personal reminders, personal contact. We can't be big enough that we can't do that yet, are we?
I think that's right.
Yeah.
No, I think we're running about 100 breeders total in the community, maybe 150. So we could definitely do phone trees. If you sign up for our MailChimp, we can do emails if we think that would work well.
I don't think we're on that list, but I was going to ask if there's an email list that we can just launch invitations or reminders.
Okay, buys. Anybody else not on our email list? George isn't on it?
I'm not on it.
Maybe I just don't read it. Me too.
One thing to think of, is there a quick way on the Breed Association's website for people to sign up? Because, like, when I sell some goats to people and I want them to be involved in the community, maybe I could just proactively sign them up. If there was, like, I know, and like on my website, people can very easily click on a link and sign up for my newsletter. I'm wondering if we can do that on the Breed Association website so that people start to get notified of these things, and they can always, you know, unsubscribe.
Sure.
But I could sign them up proactively.
Oh,
That's an interesting thing. Cause, oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I was going to say, there used to be, I'm looking now, there isn't. So that does need to be added back in.
Yeah, I was going to say, I looked at the site pretty closely and I never saw that. That's why when you said a mail list, I was kind of surprised.
I'll have that put back up. I didn't realize it was gone off the site. Thank you for pointing it out.
You could also just double up and put that link on Facebook and get it to the people who are on Facebook. They may not see it right away, but eventually.
That's a good idea too.
I know. It's just one more thing. People need to see things, 7 times before they actually do it.
Yeah.
I'm at 12.
It's actually 21. And that was
and my wife
pre-COVID.
has to remind me. Maybe if we just contact wives for that the meetings are coming up.
No, I remind her.
I'm better.
I know. Well, I'm going to hold on one second. I'm going to